The Best in the World podcast with Richard Parr.
Hello and welcome to The Best in the World with Richard Parr, where every week I speak to a different Olympic champion, world champion, former world record holder, or world number one to find out what they do differently to become the best in their sports. It's a fantastic insight into what makes a champion. This week I speak to the 2008 Beijing Olympics triathlon gold medalist, Emma Snowsill. We get a really intriguing insight into her training methods, into the mental aspect of doing a triathlon. We also talk about diet and also what she's up to now since she retired. We also talk about how she had to appeal the decisions made when she wasn't selected for the 2004 Olympics, even though she was the world champion, and the 2012 Games when she was the reigning Olympic champion. We get into all of that plus much, much more on this week's podcast with Emma Snowsill. All right, before we get to the conversation, I want to tell you that this podcast is now part of the Sportacino network. Now, you may have heard me talk and promote Sportacino before on the program. It is the daily sports chat show that I host as a video cast on Facebook, YouTube, and crucially at sportacino.com. And now all of the previous Best in the World episodes are all at sportacino.com. So it's the place you should go if you want to learn from the very best, if you want to learn from Olympic and world champions. And let's do that on today's podcast. I'm delighted to say that joining me on the program is Emma Snowsill.
The Best in the World podcast with Richard Parr.
Emma Snowsill, Olympic triathlon champion. Welcome to The Best in the World with Richard Parr. So great to have you on this week's program. Now, you've got an amazing resume. You've had an amazing career, but you retired back in 2014. So let's get people up to date with what you're up to now, please, Emma.
Yes. Well, I've probably in the last year would say that endurance sport has been easier than having a now 14-month-old. I'm now a mum, and that's a very different journey and process. And you don't get to eat and sleep and rest necessarily the way you would have liked to, or I guess what I'm accustomed to when I was training. But so yeah, I've done that, and I've done a bit of study, and currently just working on a family business with my husband Jan is still racing. And I run all the behind the scenes work there, and goodness, I don't know. I'm chef, nutritionist to the family. I'm still the jack of all trades. You know, I think that's what makes us good at triathlon, isn't it? You know, jack of all three trades, but master of none.
It sounds more exhausting than swimming, cycling and running, all of that. Let's talk a little bit more about a few of those things.
Yeah, it truly is. I've come to realise that it's a really easy way to have your dream job, I think, as much as it's probably never thought that at the time.
With all these different things going on, do you kind of miss that even more regular routine that you would have had when you were training?
Yeah, it's probably something that's, I guess, with having a child that's probably brought that up even more. It's just the fact of, that you do have a routine and that you do, know what you're doing fairly much every day, week to week, month to month, and you have goals throughout the season and races, and that's something that I would say has been, probably challenging for me, because all of a sudden I guess I didn't have to think about it, so to speak, because I knew what I was doing. Whereas, like you said, now it is a bit different, and I'm slowly finding that you've got to do that in everyday life too. I'm not sure why I didn't think I wouldn't, but it's just not something I think occurs to you until you're on the other side.
And you mentioned studying. What were you studying, Emma?
I was just doing a basic sort of nutrition course, health and wellness coaching, and sort of a little bit more along the lines of mentoring as well is something that I'm more looking to, find that's where I tend to find myself drawn to, I should say. I was just getting a lot of sort of young girls that were, asking for advice, and nutrition is something that has been an interest of mine, but I'm finding it's actually more, I feel more, I guess, attracted to helping, not just young females, males as well, but just about performance and more so, the mental aspect of competing and what that requires in your training, and I feel like that's probably more where I'm going to be heading with sort of what I learned in nutrition. Is that'll be a side step to it. But also I just think, just having the availability to help athletes in any shape or form that they want.
And we're going to pick your brain on all of that on today's show, Emma. When you mentioned nutrition, what have you learnt then in this last year or so that you wish you'd known when you were competing?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I've learnt one specific thing, because I think I've been a pretty good self-experimenter throughout my whole career, even as a young swimmer. And I think really, if anything, it's probably more or less reiterated things that I've known as, along the way, and maybe sometimes, deviated a little bit further off. But really, at the end of the day, it's about the basics, and it's about eating well and eating whole foods. And I've never been one to subscribe to a particular diet, or I've had a way of eating long before, I guess, paleo become the fashion word. And I found that that I was sort of probably more like that in my career, and tended to veer towards that style of eating and meat. But then, strangely enough, as I've retired, that's the red meat, and has sort of, I no longer feel like my body needs that. So I've been a really big advocate of self-experimentation and listening to your body, what it needs at different times. And at the end of the day, I think we sort of, can confuse ourselves quite a lot in terms of, what we should be eating, rather than just focusing on what our body really actually knows it needs.
So let's give people more of an idea of exactly what those foods are you're eating. Maybe give us an idea of what would be your meals throughout the day when you were training, when you became Olympic champion, Emma.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a huge eater for a start. I've always had a fairly huge appetite, and so I would typically have, probably like a banana smoothie for breakfast after swim training, and throughout the day, like lunch would be, most of the time like a sandwich, or more so a wrap, with a salad wrap with. I'm a big fan of salmon and a lot of avocado. So all my salads, include a lot of olive oil, nuts and seeds, cheese, so all good fats. And then dinners was, sort of like roast vegetables. Again, some some sort of fish that I enjoy, and really just using things in different ways. Like, I mean, obviously being from Australia, and a lot of the time in summer, salads are a big thing. But to me, a salad is not like cucumber, tomato, and lettuce. Like, I think that's that's a bit boring. I'm very much, like I said, throw everything in there and really make a meal of it. So, I mean, that's a very, very basic, I guess, broad term. I mean, I've eaten gluten-free for quite a number of years, and I found that that's something that agreed with me. So as gluten-free products have become more and more available, it's even, things as bread is something that, all of a sudden you can have toast again, because that's something that I've eaten. But again, really, I've really stuck to, cooked fruit, cooked vegetables mostly, I would say, and not so much fruit, but good dairy, or I guess dairy options as well, and really whole snacks. So a lot of my snacks during training were like dried fruit and nut bars, and just the same thing, just very basic, but obviously in a more easy to take and go format than put in your back pocket for cycling and quick energy. But again, nothing really particularly processed, And I guess as much as as close to how it came out of the ground or off a tree as possible in some way.
Yes, cucumber is definitely one of the most boring bits of salad you can get.
I can't stand a salad like that. And if it doesn't have like a cup of olive oil on it, then it's also just boring. I think olive oil is the most widely used drink in our household, particularly during seasons. So again, I'm just a big believer in a really good fat diet, and that adds flavour, and that that's what fills your appetite as well. That stops you wanting to continue to look for some more to eat, because you're just basically you've got your balance of foods as it is, and all your carbohydrates come from fruit or vegetables. And I think unless, like my husband who's doing Ironman, and you really need to top up and add extra grains and things. And I think it can be actually fairly simple and straightforward.
You mentioned drinks there. What are your thoughts on drinks? What are the type of drinks you would be having when you were competing or preparing to compete? Energy drinks, are they a complete no-go?
I've just never been a big fan, to be honest, personally, because I just don't have a huge sweet tooth. I've certainly gone through phases where, whether you're in China and all you really know is Coca-Cola, I've been known to have very flat, diluted Coca-Cola and water in my drink bottle. But in terms of training, again, it's just been water. I guess now coconut water is more available. And otherwise very basic electrolyte drinks, and particularly, like I said, just more so watered down, because I just can't. I'm just not a big, sweet person, and I don't think I've never felt that high doses of sugar really agree with me either. So your homemade sports drinks with some Himalayan rock salt and some squeeze of lemon juice and that sort of stuff, I probably more tend to go towards. But otherwise, I've always just really stuck to water.
All right, so we've got an idea of kind of what you were eating, what you were drinking when you were competing. Now, let's get an idea of what training is like. And what I wanted to really ask you is, because I don't know too much about the competitive world of triathlon. That's why I've got one of the best in the world here, Emma Snowsill, on the program. And through the different interviews I've had, when I've spoken to rowers, they say that most of the time they're all about training and competing very little, very often throughout the year. While, for example, the Olympic archery champion from 2000, Richard Folds, he said that it's all about competing as often as possible, training very little. Where does it stand for triathlon, Emma?
Yeah, in the distance that I was racing, so the Olympic distance of 1,500 swim, 40k bike, and 10k run, we could compete probably 12 times. 10 was pretty standard for most people. The thing is, we had a World Cup circuit, and so we accumulated points, and that gave us our world ranking, and then we finished at the end of the year with a world championship. And it's slightly changed now that it's become a series, a bit like motor racing, that you the grand final is not necessarily who wins the world championship. It's the points accumulated throughout the year, and the best sum total. So in that series alone now, we would have a good 8 races of that, and most athletes will probably race probably at least 6 of them, and then a number of races outside of those. So it's very typical for triathletes who are racing that distance to race quite often. Then you tend to have people who are doing the half Ironman, which is a 1.9k swim, a 90k bike, and a 21k run. You can still get some crazy triathletes that probably would do that many a year. You're probably looking at a few less, though, more around your 6, I guess. And then you have your Ironman athletes that I'm a big believer that, 2 is one too many a year. I think, that's really demanding on the body. And in terms of getting out really good performance. But yes, for what I was racing, it was very normal to race a good 10, 12 times a year, very standard.
Yeah, you mentioned what exactly you were doing for the Olympic distance of 1.5 kilometre swim, 40k bike, 10k run, and then you mentioned Ironmans there as well. Now, how important would it be to do those longer distance further than that to then still focus on exactly what you're trying to do, in effect, not overtraining, but training beyond what you need to do? Does that help in any way, or are you just exhausting your body?
You mean to compete, so to speak, in an Ironman and race in the Olympic distance?
Effectively, let's say it's an Olympic year and you're going for the Olympic distances. Now, in the lead up, would you be doing kind of Ironman events to just help build up the stamina so it almost makes when you do the Olympic one feel easier? Does that work at all?
No, I mean, particularly in the off season, I guess we would train a higher volume, longer miles, but it would be a lot slower. But there's just such a, I guess they're so specialised. One is for the best men in the world, 8 hours, best women 9-hour event, and this is for us a 2-hour event. So you're using very different energy systems. You're basically focusing on your speed, whereas, an Ironman is really about, trying to find that overall, best pace and that you can hold for 8-9 hours. So you would find in an Olympic year, typically, probably more around those 7 to 8 months out is when you're doing the longer volumes, but you wouldn't particularly race an Ironman. I mean, there have been people who've done it, but it's, personally, I wouldn't say that would have been ideal for me. It's a matter of that as you come into the season and you pick your races, and again, I raced a lot less in an Olympic year just to make sure that I was, fresher and more so mentally sharp. But as you were coming out of those long miles, you'd basically start cutting back the miles, but you'd start adding in the intensity. So, the paces that you were running and swimming were getting increasingly faster. But you would actually drop the amount of kilometres that you were doing down in order to actually be able to get that speed out. So it's a bit of it's a bit of cyclical phases that they go in, that you work towards, when you have an A-game race like the Olympics, you work backwards and you look at, what do you want your last race to be before the Olympics. You go through a best-case scenario plan, and for me, typically it was sort of, if the Olympics is always around August, then around that sort of December, January, February time is when I was doing those really, really, longer miles.
It sounds like there's a lot of effort going in on the planning there. And how would you kind of divide up the training for the swimming, cycling and running? Would you ever do them separately on different days, or would you try and do a little bit of all of them each day?
It would vary day to day. I mean, you would certainly have days where you would do all three, but particularly on that sort of day, one of them would be maybe a much smaller session, maybe more like a recovery run, whereas you may have had like a hard swim and a hard bike. And then the other days you may have a harder run and a hard bike. And so some days would be a hard bike session and a hard run off it. So there'd be even sessions where you would practice that, the bike to run, because it is obviously very different, and to get your legs used to running fast off a bike. And then you would have, for me, I swim in a swim squad, so obviously it was quite intense as well, that type of training. So I really devised my own, program off a coach that I had started working with in my earlier years, and just tweaked it along the way. So I would say probably, 4 days out of the week you would do maybe all 3 sessions in a day, and then the other days, would maybe just be 2 of the disciplines on those days.
The Best in the World podcast with Richard Parr.
Don't worry, we'll have more from Emma in just a moment, but I want to tell you that today's show is brought to you by Audible. Audible is one of the leading suppliers of audiobooks in the world. They've got over 180,000 titles for you to choose from. I've just been listening to Shoe Dog by Phil Knight. Yes, it's the history of the Nike brand and how Phil Knight began it all many, many years ago, back in the 60s, when he was selling the Tiger trainers and eventually made the Nike brand, which eventually went to a public offering. It's an amazing stories of ups and downs, and I think for anyone interested in sports and entrepreneurship as well, it's really worth listening to. You can go and do that at audibletrial.com/best. And if you go to audibletrial.com/best, you get to try out Audible for 30 days for free. Yes, they will give you a free trial of their service for 1 month, and during that time you get one free download. So yes, you can listen to Shoe Dog by Phil Knight for free by going to audibletrial.com/best. Go and check it out and let me know what you think. Send me a message on Twitter at Richard_Parr. All right, let's return to the conversation with Emma Snowsill.
The Best in the World podcast with Richard Parr.
Let's have a little talk about your journey and let's talk about your career. Emma, how did you first get into triathlons?
I was actually a swimmer as I grew up. From as young as I can remember, I've been in the pool, loved swimming, wanted to go to the Olympics for swimming. And then it was actually a girl in my swim club who was sort of involved in triathlon, and her parents more so. And we have a huge triathlon in Australia called the Snowsill Triathlon Festival. And you can obviously take part in a team event, and everyone does one of the three disciplines. And their swimmer pulled out, and she asked me if I could do it. And I went up and I came and saw this triathlon. I knew nothing about it. And my eyes just about fell out of my head. I just thought, wow, like, what is this? I knew I could swim 1,500 meters, especially in open water. I knew that that I would, I could do that well. But I just sort of never contemplated another sport. I was just sort of there. It was a difference to being in the pool and following the black line, and it really captivated me from then on. And I was in year 10, I think, in year 10 at the time. And so I was in my last 2 years of school. So eventually the next year I did the swim and the run. And then I think it was not even another 2 years that I did the whole thing. So it was a bit of a slow process for me, just given where I was at in for my age at school. But really, I think I just became more and more addicted to it. And obviously it was great cross-training for my swimming, but I just found that, I wanted to do that. And then it had its inclusion in the Sydney Olympics, and I went down and watched those races, and that was really the catalyst to be like, no, I want to go to the Olympics for triathlon, and that really, I guess, just changed my trajectory and where I wanted to go.
It's amazing how the Olympic Games have really inspired and motivated people, and it's happened a few times on this podcast, hearing Olympic champions who've been inspired by watching the Games. That's fantastic. And just 3 years later, Emma, you became the world champion. How did that feel to be on that podium for the very first time, being the best in the world in triathlon?
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of disbelief, to be honest. That was my first ever Australian national, so the first time I'd made the national team, and especially in the senior ranks. So at that time we had two divisions that were competing, or I guess more than two. We had junior, and we had under 23, and then we had elite professionals. And I was still young enough to compete in the under 23s, but I'd had a number of results in some World Cups that qualified me to race in the senior race. So I entered the race. I guess ignorance is bliss, and knew that I'd been working really hard, but it never came onto my radar that I would have in any way capable of winning it. I just went into the race doing what I'd been doing and training hard and really not thinking about my competition. I guess that's a benefit when you're young, and you're not really thinking, you're just doing. And to be honest, I was just in complete shock. I really thought I'd done, particularly on the run, I thought maybe I'd gone the wrong way, or I really didn't know what had happened. And I was I was very shy, I guess towards the end as well at the finish, because I was sort of thinking, I'm not sure if I was supposed to beat all these people that I'd, idolized in the sport. So it was, it was a really big shock to me. And all of a sudden, I was being asked whether I was going to the Olympics now, that, setting my sights on Athens, and it had never crossed my radar either. At that point in time, I just felt that I wasn't ready, I just didn't expect my success that soon. So, it became obviously a very different process, and I didn't make the Athens team for political reasons. And, I think I think I've had an interesting start to my career, but if anything, that missing that team, and even though I had the results to have competed there, I think it really solidified in my mind that from then on I had to do anything and everything to prove come the next Olympics that I would be, there'd be without a doubt no way they couldn't put me on the team. And I think that was, a bit of a motivation of mine coming into Beijing, really.
Well, what do you mean political reasons there, Emma? Because you were the world champion and you were ranked number one in the world at the time. For me, you're a lock for the team, surely. Yes.
We have we've had some. Oh, what have we had? 4 Olympics now, and 3 of them have all had some sort of appeal through the Court of Arbitration for Sport, and just because of selection policies, really, that they've just become a bit wish-washy, or the policy is sort of somewhat being very open in terms of, how to, we've had, say, automatic positions, but then we've had discretionary positions, and races where, they say they're looking at this, but, then they're not. It's very hard to explain. I'm not sure if all sports are like this, but really we had a couple of selection races in the lead up to Athens that I was in some sprint finishes with another girl, a young up-and-comer who hadn't really had any results until then, and they decided to take her, and more so over the fact that I still didn't believe I should have been there, because the other person they left off the team was actually our Olympic silver medalist from Sydney. So it wasn't just me that I guess, didn't make that team for political reasons. And I really felt that, our best in the world at that time was Michaela Jones, and she'd proven, with a silver Olympic medal that, that if anything, that she should have gone even above me. So, unfortunately, it's the nature of sport sometimes. It doesn't always, play out the way you would have thought. I've come to understand that.
I'm amazed that people who win Olympic gold medals in particular don't get an automatic place for the following 4 years. I had Etienne Stott, who won I think it was a canoeing gold medalist in 2012, and then wasn't selected for 2016. And I'm thinking, how can you not pick someone who's won you gold the last time round? And you had a similar problem in 2012. Now, that must have been even more frustrating, because you were the gold medalist. It doesn't make sense to me.
I think if anything, that was probably more frustrating for me that time round, because the selection policy was even more clearly in favour of our performances at big events and big races, and namely being the Olympics. And given I hadn't been, racing up to where I had been in previous years, I did actually appeal that. For that reason alone, and just because I felt that there was a lot of personal, I guess particularly, I just felt there was a lot of personal vendettas, maybe you would say, between coaches. There was just a lot of cohorting, and I just didn't think that I just didn't think everything was above board, and that's why, even though I probably knew I was never going to win my appeal, I think I just had to make sure that people were aware that what was going on wasn't what they said it would be, and the policy clearly stated one thing and yet they did another. So look, it's unfortunate, and like I said, out of now we've had 4 Olympic Games, we've had 3 times appeals, and the only time we've never had an appeal has been in Beijing, and where the team was selected very clearly, 2 automatics, 1 discretionary, and we've walked away with 2 medals. So I still believe there's something to be said for that.
Yeah, your Olympic gold medal. Let's talk about Beijing. You went into those games as the first female to win 3 world titles. How different, though, is an Olympic Games to a World Championships? What was the whole experience like for you, Emma?
Look, an Olympics is it's the most, as an athlete, it's the most mind-boggling yet experience, and yet very emotional. And I think the biggest thing I found for me, particularly being in the village and realizing the reality of that we're now at the Olympics, was, of course, we're used to competing, like you said, on the world stage and at world championships, but it's just you and your sport. So, you sort of know everyone to a degree, and you know the environment. But this was just, to be competing for your country with all these other Australian athletes that you've watched around and competing around the world, and then to see, other Olympic champions from other sports. It does require quite a lot of internalization and I guess almost blocking out, so to speak, as well, because it can feel quite overwhelming. When you're in the village, you finally made it, and it's and it can also be, I guess, somewhat distracting too. So I think for me, being that little bit older, when I got to Athens, I was probably aware of that, and I was very focused on myself and I guess keeping my holding myself together until after the race, and just knowing that now wasn't quite yet the time to really think about it and allow my mind to relax and to take in where I was and what I was about to do. And I think that also helped alleviate, pressure, because I had a lot of, I guess, my own expectations for myself. And if I really thought hard about where I was and all of a sudden the enormity of about what I wanted to do there, I really felt like I would have let that external maybe expectations that I think that I probably thought people may have had of me really take over. And I think that can be really quite almost crippling and really detrimental to your performance in the end if you're not aware of it.
Yeah, you mentioned this is the mental side of things is something you're hoping to help mentor people with. Now, you mentioned in 2003 when you won the world title, you just went out there, you ran and you won. And the Olympic Games is a bit different because you're a 3-time world champion. There's more pressure on you. There's more what you believe is expectation. Now, are there any methods that you now look back and think, all right, this is what I did to help relieve the pressure? Is there anything you would give anyone advice to try not let the pressure get to them?
I've realised in recent time it's how good I was at self-talk and not as in confidence, not as in telling myself how good I was. It was more that self-talk of being in the moment and reminding myself of what I could do in that moment. And it was something I really practiced, I guess, in training, that I really wanted to make sure became second nature in racing. And it's like what I say now to a lot of young athletes is that, if it's a 2-hour race, I believe it's a 2-hour concentration games. It's just about as much about mental energy as it is the physical, because when you're on the start line, there may be 0.1% differentiating you and the other 64 girls. In the end, it's who's got that self-talk to be able to push them further, faster, to basically tell their body to do things that a lot of the time it's not wanting to do. It's screaming in pain. It's got lactic acid. And that's where I talk about the self-talk coming in and being able to, whether it's mantras or whether you have cues that you tell yourself that you practice in training that you take into your racing. And for me, that's really about in every moment. And I had that in the swim and the bike and the run. I had little chants, I had little words that I would say to myself that, when my arms were burning or, and just to remind myself, even sometimes I would just say breathe and just tell myself to breathe, because, when you're trying to run flat out and, you can run flat out for a few seconds and all of a sudden you feel the lactic acid burn. And that's where all this self-talk, of course, the training is obviously a huge part of it, but it's being able to push those boundaries, and that's where talking to yourself, so to speak, comes into play the strongest. And it's not I'm better, I'm faster than anyone else. It's about wholly and solely focusing on yourself and telling yourself what you need to do.
Amazing stuff. Now that's the mental side of things. After you became the world champion in 2008, there's not much you can really do because you were having some physical problems, some illness. Just tell us about that whole period, Emma. It sounds pretty nasty, to be honest.
Yeah, it was not definitely not my favorite time in my life. I guess it's like what people say, who work and go on holiday and get sick. And I had breaks when I was training out throughout my career, but I'd never actually gone on holiday. And I went on holiday actually for my friend's wedding in Bali. And I guess I was just ripe for the picking, and my body and immune system, I guess I just hadn't given it maybe the time that it needed. But for whatever reason, I contracted a virus from their very, it's actually the cousin virus of the Epstein-Barr, mononucleosis. So glandular fever, I guess, is maybe what people most know it as. And that just completely flattened me, and it's called a cytomegalovirus. So basically, even as we were looking or searching for answers, particularly in blood tests, we were searching for things like Lyme's disease, Ross River fever, even to the points of, is there something even more sinister going on, because my blood values basically were showing no lot of anything. And hence why my immune system was just absolutely attacking itself, essentially. And I was constantly sick, had them really, really bad throat infections, colds, and at the worst of the times, I was in bed probably 14 hours a day, could barely get up for half an hour without laying back down and having a 3-hour nap. And so there was obviously a chronic fatigue side related to it as well. And that probably lasted for a good 3 months, I would say. And then I started seeing some light and could find, little bits of glimpses of energy, and going from, like you said, being an Olympic champion to walking to the beach and sitting there probably for an hour, and it probably took me 10 minutes to walk there, was a very difficult place to be, because I knew how I could push my body. I knew I could push it beyond its limits, and here I was not even able to function as a normal person. The fatigue was that great. And it was a really tough time, and my immune system really just got completely flattened. And then, unfortunately, on top of the first race I did come back to compete in, that following year was in Seoul in Korea, and again, I just a perfect candidate because of my immune system was still so suppressed that I picked up a parasite, and that stuck with me for another 2.5 years and just completely depleted my immune system even further. So I pretty much got a double whammy, and I really, I guess, in hindsight, I probably had warning signs, if anything, that I should have slowed down a little bit earlier and maybe have potentially have avoided it. I guess who knows whether or not I would have or not, but it's not a fun place to be, and not some place I would like to ever go back to being that sick and that run down and just so frequently sick. And the reason I also knew that it was my own body attacking itself, because nobody around me would ever get sick. So it was completely a virus that I had that just kept turning itself on me whenever I didn't listen.
And was that the major motivation for you to eventually retire in 2014?
Yes, yeah, it was 100%. I needed to retire because what I was doing, wasn't changing anything. It wasn't working, and I guess, if you can keep butting your head up against the same brick wall and getting the same result, well, then you're not learning anything, are you? And unfortunately, maybe I'd learnt the hard way that I'd pushed too far, or just hadn't, taken that time off to fully let my body recover. And I realised that something had to change. And I just remember thinking that I got to a point where my only goal was to be healthy and to be a normal, healthy, functioning human being. And I remember when that thought crossed my mind, that triathlon it had to disappear for a while. It just couldn't come into my radar because I couldn't think like that. I really had to almost remove myself and be like, no, this is where you are now, and that part of you right now has to really take a back burner in order for that change to happen, and for me to actually get to that point of being a healthy, functioning human being. And that was really hard. That was a really hard step to acknowledge, and a very hard decision to make.
And that brings us full circle to what we were talking about at the beginning of the show. And you mentioned about your lovely baby 14 months ago becoming a mother, and of course your husband is also an Olympic champion from 2008, Jan. Now, does that mean we're going to get a third Olympic champion in the family as well now?
Well, I guess if he's into sport, it's good for both of us. We can help him. If he's into physics, maths, violin, we're going to have our work cut out. But look, I'm sure as anyone with children attest to, their energy levels are high, and look, we have no plans for him to get into triathlon. If he wants to or he doesn't, that'll be completely up to him. But I'm sure he sees firsthand, particularly what his father's doing. He does recognise very early, but yeah, who knows where it will take us.
It'll be interesting because obviously he'll be growing up in a family where he will be surrounded by triathlon and Ironman and everything like that. And you do wonder how it just organically affects a child to get that interest.
Oh yeah, he already knows how to cheer and bang on the barricades, so that they certainly know far more than we give them credit for, I think, at times.
Yeah, and you mentioned the family business. What's all that about, and how's it going?
Yeah, it's really good. We have a little sports marketing business with Jan's best friend as his manager, and we have some clothing that's just been launched and called Ryzen, and that's going to be merchandising some gear of Jan's, particular line of gear of Jan's, and again, just trying to work with some events. For me, commentary is a big thing that I also really love. So we're all very intertwined in sport still. And for me, I guess that's where my mentoring and the commentary come into it. So we're in triathlon, or I should say I'm constantly surrounded triathlon, and Yeah, I feel like we've got our fingers in a lot of pies right now. I'm trying to condense them, but I don't think now's the time.
Oh, well, it sounds like it's a lot of fun either way. Well, Emma, it's been really good to talk to you. Before you go, why don't you let us know how we can continue to follow you on social media, and also some of the links for your business and anything else you'd like to promote, please.
Oh, yes, thank you. Yeah, so my Instagram is, my favorite is actually Emma Frodeno, so Frodeno. My Twitter is Emma Snowsill. I have a Facebook page, and our company or our apparel, if you're interested in triathlon gear, is Ryzon, RYZON.net. So looking forward to some big things happening out of there.
Fantastic. Well, it's been really good to talk to you. Thank you so much for being on the programme. Emma Snowsill, thank you for being the best in the world.
Thank you very much for having me.
The Best in the World podcast with Richard Parr.
Really good to talk to Emma. Hopefully we will get her husband Jan on the programme as well, so stay tuned for that. Also, we've had some really good Olympic champions from 2008 on the programme before. Maybe go back and listen to those conversations if you haven't already. Perhaps you want to know more about volleyball and the Olympic champion Phil Dalhouser. He's been on the programme. Maybe you want to learn about sailing with Anna Tunnicliffe. She's been on the programme and is now a CrossFit competitor. That's a really interesting episode. Maybe you want to listen about fencing with Matteo Taglieriol. They're all on the Best in the World with Richard Parr. As I mentioned earlier, they're at sportacino.com, part of the Sportacino network. Go and check us out. We're also on Twitter at Sportacino and, of course, on Facebook as well. So go check all of us out, like the Facebook page, and let us know what you think. All right, I've been Richard Parr, and until next week, I hope you have a wonderful week. Goodbye for now.
The Best in the World podcast with Richard Parr.